This is Math 2, Section 4.5, Day 2. We're looking at more functions, more features, a little bit more with inverses today. We're going to start off with this problem. Given that f of x is 2/3 x plus 1, I want you to find the equation of the inverse by graphing. So we're going to start out and graph that function. Slope is 2/3, y-intercept is 1. There's the y-intercept of 1, slope is 2/3, so up 2 to the right 3. Down 2 and to the left 3. If you don't have colored pencils or a ruler, please go get that right now so that you can have nice lines on here. There's the original function. That's f of x. Now using a different color, we want to graph the inverse, and we're going to do it similar to what we did yesterday in that we're going to choose selected points and switch the coordinates. So if I start right here, this point is at 6, 5. So when we reverse that, that will be at 5, 6. This nice point was at 3, 3. Interchanging the coordinates keeps that at 3, 3. This point at 0, 1 becomes 1, 0. This point at negative 3, negative 1 becomes negative 1, negative 3. And this point at negative 6, negative 3 becomes negative 3, negative 6. And using a straight edge, we can go ahead and draw that line in. And that's our inverse. That pink one for me is that inverse. I don't know what color yours are. So we want to write the equation of that inverse. And the notation again is f inverse of x equals, clearly we see a line. Can you count the slope? Pick 2 points, up 1, 2, 3, and to the right 2. So our slope is 3/2 x plus the y-intercept here. It actually is very nice. It's at negative 1.5. I'm going to write that as an improper fraction though, and it's minus because it's negative, so I'm going to change this to a minus 3/2. And there's our equation by graphing. Now, sometimes we want to find the equation and that y-intercept that's on the inverse just isn't nice. So we want to talk about what we might do if we want to algebraically find the inverse. All right, we started off with this equation, and I did change that f of x to a y. Y equals 2/3 x plus 1. And then just like we switched x and y's for individual points, we can switch the x and the y to find an inverse. So we'll make this x is 2/3 y plus 1. So to find an inverse algebraically, we will switch the x and y. And then we're going to solve for that new y. When I solve for y here, we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. That'll give us x minus 1 is 2/3 y. And we can multiply both sides by 3/2, which is the reciprocal of this 2/3. And we'll have 3/2 times the quantity x minus 1 equals y. And if we distribute that 3/2 through, y is 3/2 x minus 3/2, which is exactly what we came up with up here. And that is the inverse. Once you come up with this answer down here solved for y, that is the inverse. We look at that in more detail in section 4.6. But that's algebraically to find the inverse. Switch the x and the y and then solve for the new y. All right, there is some other miscellaneous content that's within this task that we need to go back over. And we need to talk about the formula for the area of a square. A square, some of you are saying base times height. It is base times height, except for a square, all four sides are congruent. So that area is that side length squared. And if I tell you that the side length of a square is 14 inches, then let's find the area. That area would be the side squared, or 14 squared, which you have memorized from earlier this year, 196. Our units are squared here, so this is inches squared. All right, and going on here, if a side length is x plus 5, then what's the expression for area? So again, area is side squared. That area will be x plus 5 squared, which when we square that out, means x plus 5 times x plus 5. Distributing through, x squared plus 5x plus another 5x plus 25, or x squared plus 10x plus 25. There's the expression for area. Look at this next one. If the area is 64 inches squared, then how long is each side? Well, area is side squared. And they tell us that area is 64. So 64 is the side squared. When we square root both sides, we will get s is plus or minus 8. Don't forget that plus or minus because it's important. But then we realize that a square can't have a negative side length, so that side length is 8 inches. Likewise down here, if the area of the square is x plus 23 squared, then we'll have the area is s plus 23 squared. We want to get a side length. Not s, x. You know what, I'm going to start over here. Let's go back to that formula. Area is side squared. They tell us the area is this x plus 23 is a side squared. And we want to solve for s here, so we square root both sides. Square root of s squared is the square root of x plus 23 squared. And because we're talking about a side length, we do need just the positive value. So that side length is just x plus 23. Oh, and these are centimeters. Area is units squared, side length plain old units. If I'm going too fast, please pause the video and back up and hear it again. All right, for this one, what happens, or what if the area of the square is that mess? Then what is a side length? So area is side squared. That thing is the area. So 16x squared plus 24x plus a 9 is side squared. So our side is going to have to be the square root of that mess. You cannot take the square root of individual pieces when they're being added and subtracted. So we're going to have to factor inside of here. Oh, let's try a 4x here to get that 16. Everything's positive, so plus and a plus. And two numbers multiply to be 9. 3 and 3. Let's check it. 3 times 4x, that's 12x, and another 12x for the outside. So perfect, that worked. And if I rewrite this still, 4x plus 3 times 4x plus 3 is 4x plus 3 quantity squared, which is just 4x plus 3. That's your side length, and the units here were yards. Number 19, we have to simplify this. Again, we're taking a square root of a sum here. You cannot square root both pieces. We're going to need to try and factor this, and hopefully that'll come out to be nice. X and x. When we factor that, two numbers multiplied to be 25, add up to be a 10. Oh, and that works. That's nice. Then we can rewrite this as x plus 5 quantity squared. And the square root of something squared is just that something. There you go. And this one over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to factor x and x. Ooh, how about a minus 7 and a minus 7? Sure. And square root of something squared is just that something. Okay, let's come down here and look at number 21. We are going to simplify here and write our answers in simplest radical form. We're going to distribute through. And basically, you can multiply numbers that are outside of the radical and multiply numbers that are inside the radical, but you can't mix and match. So, square root 5 times 2 is just 2 square root 5. Square root 5 times a 3 square root 2 is 3 square root 10. 5 and 2 get multiplied because they're both underneath the radical. And that square root 5 and that square root 10 do not simplify, so we are good to go right there. How about this one? Let's distribute through. 4 square root 3 times a 5, that's 20 square root 3. And then this 4 square root 3 times that negative square root 3, that's going to be minus 4. Square root of 3 times square root 3 is square root 9. Oh, but square root 9, that's 3. We have 20 square root 3 minus 12. All right, look at this next one over here. Well, this is a binomial, or two terms times another binomial. So we're going to have to distribute through this 1 multiplied by both of those pieces. So that's going to give us 2 minus 5 square root 6. And then this 4 square root 6 times both of these pieces. So 4 square root 6 times 2 is an 8 square root 6. And a 4 square root 6 times a minus 5 square root 6 is going to be minus 20 square root 36. Simplifying here, we can combine these two together. That gives us 2 plus 3 square root 6 minus 20, square root 36, that's 6. All right, 20 times 6, that's 120. So I have 2 plus 3 square root 6 minus 120. We can combine this 2 and this negative 120 to get negative 118 plus 3 square root 6. Okay, this guy down here. Again, binomial times a binomial. Let's distribute through. So we will have 7 times 4 square root 3. That's going to be, oops, I'm sorry, I forgot. 7 times 7, 49 first. Then 7 times this, that's going to be a minus 28 square root 3. That's going to be a plus 28 square root 3. And then at the end, a minus 16 square root 9. Look at these guys. A negative 28 square root 3 and a positive 28 square root 3. That adds to 0. You have a 49 here. And out there, that's minus 16 times 3. 16 times 3, 48. And we get a 1. Isn't that cool? This one had this big old mess with radicals in here, and we ended up with a nice, simple old 1. All right, last one. Let's look at this. We distribute through. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times a 5 square root 50 would be 20 square root 50. And in here we have a minus 2 square root 8. And then we're going to have a plus 5. And then 8 times 50. Square root 400. Okay, got to simplify a bunch here. We have 8 plus, this square root 50. It's going to go square root 25 square root 2, which is 20 times 5 square root 2, or 100 square root 2. Notice I kept bringing this 8 down every time. All right, now we're going to go and take care of some of these other things. Minus this square root of 8. That's the square root 4 square root 2. 2 times, and the square root 4 is 2 square root 2. So we have minus of 4 square root 2. Oops, I noticed something. You guys are probably having a heart attack, but I caught it, so we're good to go. 4 times this back over here. This was negative. So I'm so sorry. All these guys up here should have been negative. Darn cheap liquid paper. Well, it's not even liquid anymore. Paper tape. There we go. I'm so sorry. Okay, now those of you who noticed my error, you can stop having a heart attack, because I found it. All right, there we go on that one. All right, let's go back over here and continue over here. So we have 5. Square root of 40. Square root of 400. That is 20. If you know it, great. If you don't, you could break that up into square root of 4 square root 100. And then that's 2 times 10, which is that 20. And 5 times 20 is plus 100. And at the end, combining some like terms, we have 108 minus 104 square root 2. And that's it. The last side was just because I didn't have anything to put on that page, so I left it blank on purpose. Your homework for today is to do section 4.5, day 2. That was our notes for today. You are to finish the Ready, Set, Go from section 4.5. So you started it last night. Today you finish it. We're collecting it on Thursday. Thank you. Have a good night.